Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm discussing the iconic show about nothing, Seinfeld, created by Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld. And it's celebrating its 30th anniversary this year, having premiered on NBC back on July 5th, 1989. It ran for 9 seasons with a total of 180 episodes. And this show is not only one of my all-time favorite shows, but to me it's one of, if not the greatest sitcom in all of history. And it's one of those rare shows for me where no matter how many times I've seen it, it still makes me burst out laughing as if I'm watching it for the first time. It's so well written, the situations are so relatable, it's hilarious. Obviously humor is subjective, but it's obviously considered one of the most iconic sitcoms for giving us so many hilarious catchphrases and for the characters and the stories. And of course our Fab Four, we got Jerry Seinfeld, played by Jerry Seinfeld. What a coincidence. George Costanza, played by Jason Alexander, Elaine Bennis, played by Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and Kramer, played by Michael Richards. And what's interesting about this show, so it was first called The Seinfeld Chronicles, and after the pilot aired, NBC wasn't expected to pick it up, and they actually offered it to Fox, but they declined to pick it up as well. And the person we have to thank for really giving Seinfeld its chance to find an audience is a man named Rick Ludwin, and at the time he was the head of late night and special events for NBC. And so what he did was he diverted money from his budget by canceling a Bob Hope television special. And with that money, they produced 4 more episodes. And those episodes received better ratings thanks to being aired after reruns of Cheers. But Larry at the time didn't like that, saying, I don't want to be Cheers' younger brother. But thanks to that, they had picked up the show for a full run of 13 episodes. And Larry had actually, with each passing season, had felt that there were no more stories to tell, but they would keep coming back. Obviously, the show had become more and more popular over the years. But he always had the vision for what he wanted the show to be early on. And really, the premise for the show was simply how a comedian gets his material. Even though, obviously, show about nothing, which was actually just a joke in the show, it obviously is synonymous with the show itself. But Larry had a mantra for this show, which is no hugging, no learning. And it works well for this series, unlike with the majority of sitcoms where occasionally there are sentimental moments. With this show, there is none of that whatsoever, and it works perfectly because really it's just about these petty people picking apart the idiosyncrasies and quirks, particularly since they are 4 single people living in New York City. Just the kind of people you encounter on a daily basis, the situations that are relatable, and obviously that's what writers do, taking from their lives. So that's a big thing that Larry did as the showrunner, and all of the writers who worked on this series. And obviously Jerry too, since Jerry playing a fictional version of himself. And another unique thing about this show was how it would start with Jerry doing stand-up. And they did away with that in the later seasons, but in the majority of the episodes, it would be Jerry doing a stand-up routine, and it would be something relevant to the episode. And if you're a big fan of this show, I highly recommend checking out the podcast Signcast, where they covered every single episode of the series, these 2 best friends, Matt and Vinny, and they also had a few interviews on the show, so that's really cool. And they completed it in 2018, so every single episode they covered. So definitely check that out if you haven't already. And also, the great thing about this show, the theme music is great. The composer is Jonathan Wolfe, and he had said that it centers around Jerry, since Jerry's part of the soundtrack, so him doing the stand-up routine, and then he would do the music around it. And that music is iconic. Also iconic, of course, with Kramer, the physicality, and just him entering the apartment. And obviously there are video compilations of Kramer entering Jerry's apartment, just him sliding in with his one foot just every time. All of his physicality in that character is great. But personally, my favorite character of the Fab Four is George Costanza. And George is an extreme version of Larry David himself, putting all of his facets of his personality into that character. But this show is just so great with the way they tell stories, just finding the humor in everyday situations. And that it's not like typical sitcoms, even with the flow of the dialogue, with how the majority of them, it's basically set up joke, set up punchline, that kind of stuff. But the season 1 episode, Male on Bonding, for instance, where Jerry and Elaine just talking, and Elaine saying, come on, let's get out of here, I don't want to just sit here. And then Jerry saying, where do you want to go? I don't care, I'm not hungry. We can go to one of those cappuccino places. They let you just sit there. What are we going to do there? Talk? We could talk. I'll go if I don't have to talk. So Julia Louis-Dreyfus had said regarding that scene in particular, how she knew there was something special about this show, just with the pacing of the dialogue, how it was so relaxing, thus making it feel more natural and authentic. And that's something I admire about Larry David in particular as a writer and storyteller. How he knew what he wanted this show to be, he and Jerry, as co-creators, that it's really just about people talking about nothing. The episode The Pony Remark is a great one too, where Jerry makes that off-the-cuff comment, I hate anyone who ever had a pony when they were growing up. I had a pony. My sister had pony, my cousin had pony, that woman Manya, and then when she dies and he thinks she put a curse on him with the softball game. Just Jerry's family is great. Uncle Leo, hello! And his parents, Helen and Morty Seinfeld. And Morty Seinfeld was first played by a different actor in that first episode, but then he was recast. Same with actually George's father, played by Jerry Stiller. He was first played by a different actor, and then when they recast him, they actually went back and filmed the first scene he was in with Jerry Stiller, and that is in the episode The Handicap Spot. So I like that Larry had the foresight to think of those kinds of things, specifically for syndication in that case. And this show really did do a lot of groundbreaking things, especially since it is a 90s sitcom. But one of those is the episode The Chinese Restaurant, where Larry David came up with the idea to do an episode in real time, just using the format of television, just that 22 minutes. So in real time, they're waiting for a table at the Chinese restaurant. And NBC executives evidently were against this idea. They felt that there was no real story and that the viewers wouldn't be interested. Whereas Larry argued that each character, in this case there are only 3 storylines, since Kramer isn't in this episode, but the 3 of them have a story. Jerry was that he sees a woman that he recognizes but can't remember who she is exactly. Elaine is just, she's absolutely starving. And then George with his storyline with wanting to use the phone to call his girlfriend. And now that episode is considered an absolute classic, one of the best of the series. But it really was a pioneer for bottle episodes. In other words, episodes that just use one set. This one just used the Chinese restaurant set. Minimal sets and minimal characters. Really just the main characters. So it kind of plays out like a play. Another interesting episode is The Phone Message. And that one is interesting because it was written in only 2 days. And the reason for that is because it was a replacement for an episode called The Bet, or also known as The Gun. And in that episode, it would have been about Elaine buying a handgun. And then it was deemed too dark by both the cast and crew. Eventually it was scrapped. So then Larry and Jerry co-wrote this new script in just 2 days. And the main storyline revolves around George having to replace the cassette tape in the answering machine because he doesn't want his girlfriend to hear the phone message. And this comes from a real-life incident for Larry David. And this was a moment for Jason Alexander in particular, where he realized that he is playing an exaggerated version of Larry David. Because first, he had gone up to Larry saying, no one's going to believe this. And then Larry had said, well, what do you mean? This is what happened to me in real life, and this is what I did. Because before that, early on, Jason had first played George as more of a Woody Allen type persona. But then when he realized, oh, it's really just, I'm Larry. So then that opened up the character for him. Similarly, another episode direct from Larry David's personal experiences is the episode The Revenge. And in real life, Larry David had worked as a writer on SNL, and he had quit halfway through the 1984-1985 season. And then his neighbor in real life, Kenny Kramer, who is, of course, the inspiration for Kramer, but he suggested to Larry that he just show up at work the next Monday, pretending like nothing had happened. So for Larry, it worked out in real life, but it doesn't work out for George Costanza because, of course, that's funnier. Another episode where Larry pulled from his own life is The Deal, and that was the last episode filmed for season 2. And NBC executives have been pressuring them to have Jerry and Elaine get together, which is obviously a sitcom trope, the main guy and girl getting together. And that works in other sitcoms, the will they, won't they, but not for this show. And Larry had been against that idea from the start. But in brainstorming ideas, he came up with the idea of them working out a deal where they just are basically friends with benefits. And that is something he had done in real life. And obviously that's messy in real life, but it's hilarious on TV. And just the fact that they're kind of working out a transaction, Jerry and Elaine, because in the show, when it starts, they are already exes. They had dated and just didn't work out, but they stayed friends, which is a rare thing in real life too, but it does happen. But it's good too that they never actually got together. That's just not what this show is about. With this, though, that whole scene with them sitting on the couch establishing ground rules. Now let's make it a rule. Now here's another little rule, which is them going back and forth. The idea is to keep this and add that. This cannot be disturbed, as in their friendship. It's really the only time, though, at the end when Elaine's saying, it's like this, that, and the other, wanting a relationship. And it's implied that they'll try a relationship, but then by the next episode, it's back to square one. They're just friends again. It's a reset. Because this was the last episode filmed for that season, even though it was aired out of order. But we never even see them kiss or anything on screen at all. Because all those romantic moments, if they're not funny, it just doesn't work for this show. It's not meant to be sincere and heartfelt in that way. So I find that clever and just in line, obviously, with the overall tone of this show. Going back to that mantra, no hugging, no learning. Another great episode is The Fix-Up, where Jerry and Elaine are going to fix up George and her friend. And her friend, she's played by Maggie Wheeler, who is Janice from Friends. But just that whole back and forth, thick, lustrous hair is important to me. Thick, lustrous hair is important to you? Is that what you just said? And it's just so funny, the juxtaposition of those two scenes, showing what's important to women, because with her, it's first of all, what does he do? And with George, it's first him asking all these questions about her appearance. Like, is there, about her cheek, is there a pinkish hue? A pinkish hue. Yeah, rosy glow. There's a hue. And then with her hair, it's like, if I stick my hand in the hair, will I be able to get it out? Do you want to be able to get it out, or do you not want to be able to get it out? I like to be able to get it out. I think you'll be able to get it out. And then what about personality after, of course, all her appearance? It's just so funny. And then when Jerry and Elaine are bickering later, it's like, get your finger out of my face. And then Kramer comes in to break it up. It's like, hey, break it up. Now, don't you two see that you're in love with each other? So dumb. And Kramer, there are only 2 episodes that he's not in. So one is the Chinese restaurant, and the other one is the pen. And that's the only episode where George isn't in it. And that one's great, though, with Jerry and Elaine visiting Jerry's parents because Jerry's dad is receiving an award. And the whole thing with that guy, Jack Klompus, and how he's got this pen. You could write upside down with it. It's like, oh, it's what astronauts use. And then Jerry's just going on about it. And then he's like, take the pen. I insist. Do me a personal favor. Okay. And then it just all blows up in his face. Shouldn't have taken that pen. And then when Elaine is hopped up on muscle relaxers later in the episode, and she's just all loopy, saying, Stella, Stella. Little streetcar named Desire. And the busboy is an interesting episode, too, because that's the first one where, really, Jerry doesn't have a major storyline. It's also where Larry first realized that he had his 2 storylines collide. And it's with Elaine wanting to get rid of her boyfriend, and then that whole thing where she had just missed getting him to the airport. It's like, and then I hit the Van Wyck. And then the other plot is George accidentally getting the busboy fired. So then when those 2 characters meet in the hallway and just have a shouting match, and it was the first time where the 2 storylines literally collided. And then from that point on, Larry realized, oh, I can have these storylines intersect. And that is another thing I really love about this show, how the endings, in many instances, the storylines all affect one another, the weaving in and out with each of the storylines throughout each episode. It's fantastic. Another iconic episode is the parking garage. And what's great about that episode is, in fact, the ending where the car doesn't start, Kramer just trying to turn on the ignition and it won't start. That wasn't scripted. They were actually supposed to, when they eventually find the car, which of course is relatable too, at the parking garage, can't remember where you parked. So then when they eventually do find the car, and then they drive away. But with the car not starting, it was just one of those serendipitous things where that truly was the perfect ending for this. Just after all that, they're just stuck there. Another great episode is The Red Dot. Well, first off, it's just great with George giving Elaine the Christmas present, and it's a cashmere sweater, and he got it cheaper because there's a red dot on it. And then when Kramer just says, what's that red dot on your sweater? He just is able to catch it. And then that scene with his boss. I'm going to get right to the point. It's come to my attention that you and the cleaning woman have had sexual intercourse on the desk in your office. And then George responds with, was that wrong? Should I not have done that? I tell you, I gotta plead ignorance on this. Just that line, Jason Alexander said that was a defining moment for George, the type of character he is, that he'll just go to any great lengths, any lie he has to tell to cover his ass. Another great episode, speaking of great lying from George, is The Boyfriend. When he's at the unemployment office and he gives the woman Jerry's number. And then he's saying, did anyone call here asking for Vandalay Industries? He's like, listen, when someone calls, you gotta say Vandalay Industries. It's like, I'm Vandalay Industries. What is that? You're in latex. And what do I do with that? I don't know. You manufacture it. And you're considering hiring me as your latex salesman. I'm going to hire you as my latex salesman? That's right. I don't think so. That laugh from Jerry, that gets me every time. It's just so genuine. It's great. And then just by the end, when, of course, Kramer picks up the phone, it's like, what delay? No, you're way off. This is an apartment. It's like, yeah, no problem. Say about delay. And then George comes out of the bathroom, pants around his ankles, and then he just collapses on the floor. And then Jerry walks in and sees him and just says, and you want to be my latex salesman, which apparently was an ad-lib. George just loves that fake name, Art Vandelay, and he also loves pretending he's an architect. I'm an architect. Really? Anything I might have seen? The Guggenheim? Yeah, it didn't take very long either. But the boyfriend episode, the storyline with Jerry is just so funny too, with Keith Hernandez. Oh, I'm not going to help him move. I just met the guy. And then when he asks out Elaine, and then Elaine saying, wait, are you jealous of him or are you jealous of me? I'm jealous of everyone. And then in season 4, that's a great season because the overarching storyline throughout that season with Jerry and George writing a pilot, and that first episode that introduces that storyline, the pitch, when they're just at the coffee shop, good old monks. I love that scene so much. I gotta play a clip of it. Here you go.
So what's happening with the TV show? You come up with anything?
No, nothing.
Why don't they have salsa on the table?
What do you need salsa for?
Salsa is now the #1 condiment in America.
Do you know why? Because people like to say salsa. Excuse me, do you have any salsa? We need more salsa. Where's the salsa? No salsa.
Yeah, it must be impossible for a Spanish person to order salsa and not get salsa. I wanted salsa, not salsa.
So do you know the difference between salsa and salsa? You have the salsa after the salsa.
This should be the show. This is the show.
What?
This. Just talking.
Yeah, right.
No, I'm really serious. I think that's a good idea.
Just talking? Well, what's the show about?
It's about nothing.
No story?
No, forget the story.
You gotta have a story.
Who says you gotta have a story? Remember when we were waiting for that table in that Chinese restaurant that time? That could be a TV show.
And who's on the show? Who are the characters?
I could be a character.
You?
Yeah, you base a character on me.
So on the show, there's a character named George Costanza?
Yeah. What, there's something wrong with that? I'm a character. People are always saying to me, you're quite a character.
And who else is on the show?
Elaine could be a character. Kramer.
Now, he's a character. So everybody I know is a character on the show.
Right.
And it's about nothing.
Absolutely nothing.
So you're saying I go into NBC and tell them I got this idea for a show about nothing.
We go into NBC.
We? Since when are you a writer?
What writer? We're talking about a sitcom.
You want to go with me to NBC?
Yeah, I think we really got something here.
What do we got?
An idea.
What idea?
An idea for the show.
I still don't know what the idea is.
It's about nothing.
Right.
Everybody's doing something. We'll do nothing.
So we go into NBC, we tell them we got an idea for a show about nothing.
Exactly.
They say, what's your show about? I say nothing.
There you go.
I think you may have something here.
All the meta humor in there, it's fantastic. This episode also introduces us to Susan Ross, played by Heidi Swedberg, and then when she comes up to the apartment and George's saying, oh, good, tell him the good news, she's saying, well, and then the phone rings. Sorry, excuse me, 1 second. Hello? Hi, would you be interested in switching to TMI long distance? Oh, gee, I can't talk right now. Why don't you give me your home number and I'll call you later? I'm sorry, we're not allowed to do that. Oh, I guess you don't want people calling you at home. No. Well, now you know how I feel. Just that great moment, and the audience really applauds to that one. It's just one of those things where you wish you could say that in real life, just telling off those telemarketers. Just stop calling me, leave me alone. And another episode similar, where it's just kind of that everyman moment where you just want to really stick it to the person. In the episode, The Alternate Side, when they're at the car rental place, Jerry and Elaine, and then Jerry says, do you have my reservation? Yes, we do. Unfortunately, we ran out of cars. But the reservation keeps the car here. That's why you have the reservation. I know why we have reservations. I don't think you do. If you did, I'd have a car. See, you know how to take the reservation. You just don't know how to hold the reservation. And that's really the most important part of the reservation, the holding. Anybody can just take them. But back to season 4, just so many great episodes that season. Another great one is the Cheever letters, where they find all these love letters between Susan's father and John Cheever. It's like, oh, Dad, you and John Cheever? Yes, he's the most wonderful person I've ever known. I loved him deeply. A love you can understand. And then Jerry and George just want to get out of that situation. It's like, oh, pointing at his watch. Oh, well, time is what he's indicating there. Oh, gosh. And that episode, the ending is great, where Elaine just says, oh, maybe I'll go see my mother. She has my panties all laid out for me. And it's just one of those moments that is just so satisfying. And Jerry freezes because earlier he had said with the dirty talk and he had just blurted that out. So then it's like the woman told Elaine. It's just so funny because that's an embarrassing story from one of the writers. And they just put that in the show because embarrassing stories make for hilarious TV. And speaking of embarrassing, in the episode The Pick, where poor Elaine was sending out the Christmas card because Kramer had taken her picture, and then after the fact, when Jerry's looking at it saying, hey, did you take a good look at this picture? It's like, well, I may be wrong, but I think I see a nipple. And she's like, oh no, I sent that to everyone I know. And then when George walks in and he's saying, how come everyone gets a Christmas card? Jerry got a Christmas card. Kramer got a Christmas card. I thought we were good friends. You want a Christmas card? You want a Christmas card? Here's your Christmas card. It's so funny. And just the episodes with just a central, simple premise to, like, the movie. They all want to go see a movie. They all keep missing each other. And they have all those funny ways of describing each other. It's like, oh, do you see this tall guy? Looks like a hipster doofus. Just all that stuff. A short woman with a frying pan face, whatever they say. Guy with a horse face. All this weird stuff. The subway is a funny one, too. Just all the antics on the subway, then George getting robbed. $8? What are you doing? You're robbing me? And just that whole scene with Kramer trying to get a seat, just everyone quickly rushing to get a seat. That whole visual gag is great. The airport is a great episode too, with George priding himself on the perfect airport pickup, and then Jerry and Elaine just running to catch the plane, and Jerry saying, oh, you can't run like a girl if you gotta catch a plane. You want to make this plane? You got to run like a man. Get your knees up. And he's just like, anytime he gets hysterical with that high register in his voice, it's just so funny. The Outing is a great episode too, because that gave us the classic phrase, not that there's anything wrong with that, with that journalist girl, and then Lane saying, oh, that woman, she's eavesdropping. It's like, if you're gay, just be gay. And then George saying, what do you say? And so then when she's at Jerry's apartment interviewing him, and then of course George is there and she thinks they're together, and he's saying, Jerry, did you wash this pair? It looks like it hasn't been washed. I washed it. It's like, you see the way he talks to me? You should see the way my boyfriend talks to me. And she's saying, oh, so do your parents know? My parents, they don't know what's going on. And they realize, it's like, oh, you're the girl from the coffee shop. It's like, no, we were just doing that for your benefit. We're not gay. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, it's fine if you are. My father's gay. George just in all his insecurities. Even in that other episode where he gets the massage from the male masseuse, it's like, I think it moved. Another classic catchphrase from The Implant. They're real and they're spectacular. The Junior Mint is a great one too, where Jerry doesn't remember the name of the woman he's dating. She's saying, you don't know my name, do you? What is it? It rhymes with a female body part. She's like, Mulva. And then she walks out, and then he's saying Gipple. And before that, when George is trying to help him, now let's try breast. Celeste, Cast. And then after she leaves, he's like, oh, Dolores! And apparently that was just a suggestion from an audience member, where they had just asked the audience, what do you think her name is? And then someone had suggested Dolores, and then they went with that. Dolores! That's great. But that season just culminates with the pilot. They shoot the Jerry pilot, that whole sequence where they're doing the auditions for Elaine, Kramer, and George. That's great. And then the Kramer actor steals the box of raisins, and then that whole thing with George. And then afterwards, when the pilot airs and you see all different characters throughout the season watching it, which is clever. But then after it airs, and the woman calls saying, well, Russell and I didn't see eye to eye in a lot of projects, and my first order of business, I'm passing on your show. And I was actually told that executives don't use I when they make decisions. They actually use we. And the reason for that is because they don't want to be the sole reason. For instance, if a show isn't picked up and then is picked up by a different network and becomes a hit, they don't want to have that responsibility on their shoulders. So they always use we so that they can't place the blame on one person. But that's so funny too with Russell. He just quits his job because he's obsessed with Elaine, and she's like, I don't respect, that's fine what you do, but I'm not into all that, the whole TV industry world. And then he's at the Peace Corps, And then they're like, well, where'd Ellis see? It's like, oh, it couldn't have been for me. Of course it could have. You're very charming. And then he's just in the Peace Corps now, and the raft. And Larry David is in there too. Because Larry makes cameos here and there. He also was in the episode The Gum, where it's a lot of gum. But when George didn't realize he had the 20 all along with the lipstick on it, when he gives it to Larry, and he's like, I'm sorry, Your Majesty, but we don't accept bills with lipstick on the president. He's also in that episode wearing a cape for some inexplicable reason, and I'm Frank Costanza's lawyer. But of course, the most iconic episode of season 4, and one of the most iconic episodes of the entire series, is the contest. And what's cool is that they had a board of all the episode titles for the season, and every once in a while, an NBC executive would come in and ask them, oh, what's this episode about? What's the storyline for this one? And Larry purposely left off the contest because he didn't want NBC executives asking him about it and running the risk of them not allowing them to do that episode. And this episode, too, is pulled from Larry David's personal experiences. And it's just so clever, the fact that they never overtly say what the contest is about, but you know what it is, just from George's, I was alone. I love that whole scene with the 4 of them in monks. I gotta play the clip of it. Here you go.
Hey, Georgie. Hi.
Hi.
What's the matter?
My mother caught me.
Caught you? Doing what?
You know. I was alone.
You mean?
She caught you? Where?
I stopped by the house to drop the car off, and I went inside for a few minutes. Nobody was there. They're supposed to be working. My mother had a Glamour magazine. I started looking
Glamour?
through it. So one thing led to another.
So what did she do?
First she screams, George, what are you doing? My God! And it looked like she was going to faint. She started clutching the wall, trying to hang on to it.
Man.
I didn't know whether to try and keep her from falling or zip up.
What did you do?
I zipped up.
She fell?
Yeah. Well, I couldn't run over there the way I was.
No, I guess it
I wouldn't think so.
done that.
So she fell, and then she started screaming, my back, my back. So I picked her up. I took her to the hospital.
How is she?
She's in traction.
Sorry.
It's not funny, Elaine.
I know, I'm sorry.
Her back went out. She's got to be there for a couple of days. All she said on the way over in the car was, why, George, why? I said, because it's there.
Glamour?
All right, I'll tell you this, though. I am never doing that again.
What? You mean in your mother's house or all together?
All together.
Give me a break.
Right.
Come on.
You don't think I can?
No chance.
You think you could?
Well, I know I could hold out longer than you.
Care to make it interesting?
Sure, how much?
$100?
You're on.
Wait a second. Count me in on this.
You?
Yeah.
You'll be out before we get the check.
I want to be in on this, too.
Oh, no. None of oranges. It's a different thing because you're a woman.
So what?
It's easier for a woman not to do it than a man. We have to do it. It's part of our lifestyle. It's like shaving.
Oh, that is such a baloney. I shave my legs.
Not every day.
All right, look, you want to be in?
Yeah.
You got to give us odds. At least 2 to 1. You got to put up $200.
No, 1,000.
Now, I'll put up 150.
All right, you're in for 150.
Okay, 150.
All right, now, how are we going to monitor this thing?
Well, obviously, we all know each other very well. I'm sure we'll all feel comfortable within the confines of the honor system.
All right, come on. Get it?
What's so funny with that scene, the part where George says, it's not funny, Elaine, that's actually an ad-lib from Jason. And if you watch it, you can tell he's full on smiling. Seems like he's on the verge of laughing. And it's just so great. And what's also cool is this is actually the first episode featuring George's mom, Estelle, played by Estelle Harris. And the first episode with his dad is the handicap spot. You know, hate that Drake. But then this episode just becomes a competition of resistance. And then one by one, first Kramer slapping down the money on Jerry's counter. I'm out. And then Elaine because of John F. Kennedy Jr. But this episode also gives us that phrase, are you still master of your domain? Oh, I'm queen of the castle. Lord of the manor. It's great. Everything about it is just so clever, so iconic. And then season 5, great episode is The Mango, where Elaine tells Jerry, you didn't know. You didn't know. It's like, you faked with me? That's right, you faked it, I faked it. What about the moaning, the panting, the screaming, the breathing? Fake, 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 fake. It's like that whole production, not bad, huh? And then he wants another shot. He's like, give me another shot. She's like, what? No. And he's like, oh, you don't want me to do it. You like having this over me. She's like, no, it's going to ruin our friendship. It's like, oh, friendship's menship. And it's like, he's acting like a kid. He's like, come on, Elaine, no. And at the end, she's just like, all right, let's go. I'll give you half an hour. Jerry, we have to have sex to save the friendship. Sex to save the friendship. Well, if we have to. And just that subplot with Kramer, how he is banned from getting fruit from Joe. He's saying, oh, let's go to the supermarket. And he says, they don't have a decent piece of fruit at the supermarket. The apples are mealy, the oranges are dry. I don't know what's going on with the papayas. Another iconic episode, the puffy shirt. That is apparently one of Larry David's favorite episodes. But just that puffy shirt. I don't want to be a pirate. And George being a hand model. And he moves back in with his parents in this episode. But that puffy shirt is iconic. And it's just so funny that Jerry didn't realize he had agreed to wear the shirt because the woman who's a low talker that Kramer is dating in this episode, and he's just nodding. It's like, you mean I nodded? I agreed to wear this shirt on television? I look ridiculous. So that's the low talker. But then by the end, she's just screaming at him. He's like, oh, keep your voice down. You know, if you talked like this to begin with, we wouldn't have had this problem. So that's the low talker. And then the raincoats, we have the close talker. The guy Elaine is dating, Aaron. And that's just so funny when he's just right up in their personal space. And then it's like, what about you, Jerry? It's like, no, thanks. He's basically like nose to nose. It's just so funny. And then in the episode The Pledge Drive, we have the high talker. No, not a loud talker, a high talker. With that guy, Dan, and Elaine's friend, Noreen. And they just sound exactly alike. And then when Elaine is talking to Noreen, she thinks she's talking to Noreen, but actually it's Dan. And she's saying, Noreen, were you flirting with him? Saying, what? This is Dan. And that episode, too, it's with Elaine's boss, Mr. Pitt, eating his Snickers bars with a knife and fork. And then that just becomes a thing with people eating cookies and donuts with a knife and fork. And then Jerry saying how I saw a guy on the street eating M&Ms with a spoon. And then George all offended when he thinks the waitress gave him the finger. Do you see what just happened here? She gave me the finger. It's like she could use any one of those fingers. That finger was for me. And then also with Jerry's Nana, and then when Elaine thinks it is that Noreen person, and she's saying, oh, Jerry doesn't want to talk to you, so why don't you just drop dead? And then afterwards they find out it was Nana. It's like, oh, you hung up on my Nana? You told Nana to drop dead. Poor Nana. But it's just so funny. And then a moment that I think just sums up the tone of the show so well, it's in the episode The Glasses, when Elaine gets bit by the dog and then she's just bleeding. She's saying, Jerry, you could follow me. You could just follow the trail of blood. And then as she's limping out with her bleeding leg, and then she's still holding open the door, and then Jerry walks out. Thank you. Just that classic blend of selfishness yet politeness. Just so petty, even when he's talking to George, like, yeah, here, like, just 1 second, like, not caring at all. But so many great moments in that episode when George is eating pretzels. These pretzels are making me thirsty. No, but when he's eating pretzels and he's got his effeminate-looking glasses on, and Kramer says, may I have one of those, madam? And then before, when he's just wearing his prescription goggles because he thinks someone stole his glasses, and then he's saying, let me just get an apple, and he bites into an onion. And Elaine's saying, George, that's an onion. And Jerry's saying, you're eating onions, you're spotting dimes, I don't know what the hell is going on. Another moment that sums up the tone of the show so well is the dinner party, when the guy steps on Elaine's foot with his cane on accident, and he says, sorry. And she says, sorry? You almost took my toe off. Why don't you watch what you're doing, you lunatic? Just no remorse or empathy for someone with a cane. Just, even if it was just an accident, just no, how dare you, you lunatic. But that episode is just great too, with look to the cookie, Elaine, look to the cookie, with the black and white cookie. And yet somehow racial harmony eludes us. Because the key to eating a black cookie, Elaine, is wanting to get some chocolate and some vanilla. And they want to get a chocolate babka, but then the last one is taken, and it's like there's a cinnamon babka. Another babka? And then beforehand, when they're looking at the other pastries and wondering if they should get something else, and Elaine's just carrot cake, and Jerry says, you don't make carrots into a cake, I'm sorry. They just have strong opinions about every little thing. It's just fantastic. And then George and Kramer are buying wine, and George with his Gore-Tex coat. And then by the end, when they're just all so fed up, they don't even want to go to the party. Then just, here's your cake and your wine, and just walk out. And speaking of voicing strong opinions, the episode The Sniffing Accountant with Newman, and I haven't mentioned Newman yet, played by Wayne Knight. Newman! Jerry's nemesis, for no real reason, really, but it's just funny how Jerry Seinfeld himself has said that he liked how he had a nemesis, because Superman has a nemesis, and he loves Superman, and Superman is featured in many episodes, but that's classic too. Hello, Newman. Hello, Jerry. His disdain for Newman, the mailman. But when they're doing the stakeout, and Kramer says, feels like Tuesday. Tuesday has no feel. Friday's a feel. Monday's a feel. Sunday. I feel Tuesday. All right, shut up, the both of you. You're making me nervous. But that episode is great, too, with that sweater. And then Kramer wearing the sweater. And then when he's talking to the accountant and he's saying, here's to feeling good all the time. He just chugs the beer. And it turns out that's the thing he's allergic to. The sweater. But another absolute classic is The Marine Biologist. Just that whole monologue at the end with George. The sea was angry that day, my friends, like an old man trying to send back soup at a deli. And apparently that whole monologue wasn't rehearsed. They had just come up with it that day, written it, and Jason Alexander memorized it, 2-page monologue. And so Jerry reacting to it in the scene, he said it was really just him impressed that Jason was remembering these lines perfectly. The stand-in is a great one too. That's the first episode with Mickey Abbott, played by Danny Woodburn. The two of them just being stand-ins for that soap opera. I'm not really going away, Tom. But that too has a great line delivery from Julia when Jerry sets up Elaine with his friend, and then she's saying, how should I put this? Well, just put it. He took it out. What? He took it out. He took what out? It's just fantastic. Again, not having to say what it is, and you know what it is. And another episode I love is The Fire. That whole scene with George, when it's like, hey, everyone, I think I smell some smoke back here. Fire, fire! The kid's screaming. He pushes the mom out of the way. He pushes the kids out of the way, runs out. When first he's talking to Eric the clown. How could you not have heard of Bozo? And then afterwards, when he's trying to cover his own ass as always, and the woman saying, but I saw you push the woman and children out of the way in a mad panic. I saw you knock them down, and when you ran out, you left everyone behind. Seemingly, to the untrained eye, I can fully understand how you got that impression. What looked like pushing, what looked like knocking down, was a safety precaution. In a fire, you stay close to the ground, am I right? Well, and when I ran out that door, I was not leaving anyone behind. Quite the contrary. I risked my life, making sure that exit was clear. Any other questions? And then the first responder says, how do you live with yourself? It's not easy. Also in this episode, I absolutely love Kramer's whole monologue with the pinky toe when Jerry goes down to heckle the woman Toby after she had disrupted his set. And that whole story Kramer tells, it's so crazy and it's just so hilarious. I gotta play a clip of it. Here you go.
What did you go up there to heckle her for?
Because she came down to the club and heckled me. I give her a taste of her own medicine.
Oh, yeah! You gave her a taste of medicine, all right.
Well, I didn't want her to have an accident.
What accident?
Well, after he heckled Toby, she got so upset she ran out of the building and a street sweeper ran over her foot and severed her pinky toe.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, then after the ambulance left, I found the toe. So I put it in a Cracker Jack box, filled it with ice, and took off for the hospital.
What? You ran?
No, I jumped on the bus. I told the driver, I got a toe here, buddy. Step on it.
Holy cow!
Yeah. Then, all of a sudden, this guy pulls out a gun. Well, I knew any delay's gonna cost her pinky toe, so I got out of the seat and I started walking towards him. He says, where do you think you're going, Cracker Jack? I says, well, I got a little prize for you, buddy. Yeah. Knocked him out cold.
How could you do that?
Yeah, then everybody is screaming because the driver, he's passed out because of all the commotion. The bus is out of control. So I grab him by the collar, I take him out of the seat, I get behind the wheel, now I'm driving the bus.
You're Batman.
Yeah, I am Batman. Then the mugger, he comes to and he starts choking me. So I'm fighting him off with one hand and I kept driving the bus with the other, you know. Then I managed to open up the door and I kicked him out the door, you know, with my foot, you know, at the next stop.
You kept making all the stops?
Well, people kept ringing the bell.
What about the toe? What happened to the toe?
Well, I am happy to say that the little guy is back in place at the end of the line.
You did all this for a pinky toe?
Well, it's a valuable appendage.
My favorite line in that scene is just when Jerry says, you kept making all the stops? Like, that's the most absurd thing to him about this entire story. Well, people kept ringing the bell. I love, too, that there's just no visuals. It's just Kramer telling the story, and you just get caught up in it. It's fantastic. I love it. It's so hilarious. I also love the episode The Hamptons, which gives us the phrase shrinkage. When Jerry's girlfriend walks in, I'm sorry, I thought this was the baby's room. I'm really sorry. Just the way she laughs, it's fantastic. And then, I was in the pool. And then afterwards they ask Elaine if women know about shrinkage. She's like, what, you mean like laundry? No, when a man goes swimming afterwards, it shrinks. Why does it shrink? It just does. I don't know how you guys walk around with those things. And then the breathtaking baby. It's like some ugly baby, huh? And then Elaine is confused why the doctor referred to the baby as breathtaking and her as breathtaking because the baby is just so ugly. It's like, oh, it's a must-lie situation with that baby. You gotta see the baby. And then George gets his revenge on Jerry's girlfriend by putting lobster in the eggs because she's kosher. Like, there's lobster in these eggs? So that one's just great. And, of course, the opposite is fantastic. And it's a rare episode where George has a win. And, of course, it's because he does the opposite. If every instinct you've had is wrong, then the opposite must be right. So then George decides to do the opposite. It's like, no, nothing has ever come good for me with tuna on toast. I want the exact opposite of tuna on toast. Chicken salad on rye with the side of potato salad and a cup of tea. And then the woman looking over us, and then he goes up to her. So I couldn't help but notice you were looking in my direction. Yes, you just ordered the exact same lunch as me. My name is George. I'm unemployed and I live with my parents. I'm Victoria. Hi. So then he just does the opposite. Then in the movie theater, when the people are being noisy, and then he's just screaming at them and saying, if you think I'm kidding, try me. It's like saying, I'll take you out back and show you what it's like, whatever that means. And then they just applaud him afterwards. And then with his honesty and just telling people how he really feels, and then when he talks to George Steinbrenner, owner of the New York Yankees, and he gets a job, hire this man. And of course, Steinbrenner, he's voiced by Larry David. And then even when Larry had left the show, he was still voicing Steinbrenner way after he left the show after season 7. But also got to mention David Puddy, played by Patrick Warburton, and he's Elaine's boyfriend throughout the later seasons. But the episode The Face Painter, when he's just saying, how come people don't have dip for dinner? Why is it only a snack? Why can't it be a meal, you know? I don't understand stuff like that. And just Tony paints his face. We're the devils, the devils. I also love the big salad. Imagine her taking credit for your big salad. The fact that George is just so offended that the woman he's dating at the time, Julie, when she just hands the bag to Elaine, and Elaine thanks Julie, and then he's saying, well, it's just a miscommunication, where you thanked her for the big salad, even though he paid for the big salad. And then he's annoyed by the end, saying, you had to tell Julie that I made a big point that I bought you the big salad. You know, if it was a regular salad, it wouldn't have said anything, but you had to have the big salad. And then the other storyline in that episode with Jerry, when he's so put off by the woman he's dating because he finds out that she went out with Newman, and that Newman somehow found her unacceptable. And then when Elaine's saying, maybe there's more to Newman than meets the eye. No, there's less. I've looked into his eyes. He's pure evil. I also love the episode The Gymnast, when George eats the eclair out of the trash, and Jerry says, you find yourself in the kitchen, you see an eclair in the receptacle, and you think to yourself, what the hell, I'll just eat some trash. And then the woman thinking George is a bum, basically. When it looks like he's cleaning windshields, all that stuff, ridiculous. I also love the episode The Soup with Kenny Banya, that comic that just is so obnoxious and drives Jerry crazy. And then he just gives him the Armani suit. It's like, I'll tell you what, you could buy me a meal sometime. Another one of those moments where it's just one of those things, like how you would honestly answer in real life. When Kenny Banya says, you work out with weights? No, I don't. You should. Why? And he just doesn't say anything, like he doesn't have an answer for it. And then when he says, get the swordfish, best swordfish in the city, the best, Jerry, I'll have the salmon. And then, you know what, I think I'm just gonna have soup, I'll save the meal for another time. It's like, no, this is the meal. Soup's not a meal, you're supposed to buy me a meal. It's like, well, I don't want anything, I just want soup. Then that's the meal. Even though, in my opinion, soup is a meal. It may not be a big meal, but I've had it for dinner many times. It also obviously is an appetizer. But the fact that he's going on and on about that, I'm with Jerry that that's not the point. The point is the act of sitting down with him, and also that he knows what he's doing. He just wants to spend more time with Jerry, clearly, and he's like, oh, I'll just use this as an excuse. Like, oh, another time you can buy me a meal. So that's the whole principle of the matter. And then instead he's just making it about, oh, well, soup's not a meal. And then Elaine weighing in, like, did he crumble any crackers? Oh, soup and crackers, that could be a meal. But just him using that as an excuse, wanting to hang out with Jerry. And Jerry just doesn't want anything to do with this guy. Just like that Ovaltine thing. Why do they call it Ovaltine? The mug is round, the jar is round, they should call it Roundtine. That's gold, Jerry, gold. Love that. And the soup, of course, not to be confused with the episode The Soup Nazi, with the classic, no soup for you. And apparently that was just based on a food cart outside of where they worked, NBC, the writers at the time, I guess, in New York. And just this person wielding all this power over this little food cart. So then just this soup Nazi, how the slightest thing setting him off, then no soup for you. And then the episode The Switch is great. That's when we find out Kramer's first name, Cosmo. I'm Cosmo Kramer. And at first they just are laughing so much at that, like, Cosmo. It's like, oh, well, you really kept that one a secret. And then the whole storyline with Jerry wanting to make the switch. Like, have you realized that no one has ever successfully completed the roommate switch, wanting to date the other roommate, and then George saying, I got it, saying, do the menage, and then the roommate ends up being into it, and saying, I can't be an orgy guy. And the Fusilli Jerry is a fun one. Cosmo Kramer, you are the ass man. It's like, oh, maybe a proctologist. So funny with that. 1,000,000 to 1 shot, Doc, 1,000,000 to 1. The Secretary is a great episode with skinny mirrors, when after the fact, when Elaine buys a dress and then realizing she doesn't like how she looks, and she's like, you think I would have bought this? Looks like I'm carrying twins. But then in the store she looked great, and then when she tries another dress, and then she's like asking someone, how do you think this looks? Oh, you won't be able to pull it off. And then the storyline with George hiring a secretary, and he doesn't want to hire an attractive woman, and then he's saying, you're extremely attractive, you're gorgeous, and looking at you, I can't even remember my name. I love that delivery, it's so funny. And so then when he hires Ava, and then he ends up just sleeping with her anyway, it's like, you were just so efficient. It's like, you're predicting my every thought. You know what I'm thinking now? It's like, is it doable? Yes, I think it's doable. And then they just have sex, and then he just screams, I'm giving you a raise! So then he's like, so you're having sex, and you scream, I'm giving you a raise. Well, how long has she been there? 3 days. Almost a week. And then season 7, the whole overarching storyline is George getting engaged. So with that first episode of the season, the engagement, George Costanza is getting married! But George deciding he's going to grow up, and then he shakes his hands with Jerry like it's a pact now, and then he asks Susan to marry him. And that's so funny too. It's like, well, it took a few hours of convincing, and then when George tells his parents he's getting married, it's like, you're getting married? Oh, really? And then she's talking to Susan. She's saying, I just want you to know I love your son very much. You do? May I ask why? God. And then afterwards, when George is talking to Jerry and he's saying, oh, what about you and Melly? I know you're not getting married. And it's like, well, we kind of broke up. Well, she's got the strangest habit. She eats her peas one at a time. You've never seen anything like it. It takes her an hour to finish them. We've had dinner other times. I've seen her eat corn niblets, but she scooped them. She scooped the niblets. Yes, that's what was so vexing. And it's like, oh, wait, celebrate. How about some champagne? You know what? No champagne. Just all that. And it's like the writing's on the wall that this is doomed from the start, this relationship. And Jason Alexander had said that with Heidi Swedberg, just the chemistry, it was never really there with the characters. But that's what makes it work and what makes it funny on the show. How George and Susan, they're not really a good couple at all. And that's why it's funny. And that's why George's trying to get out of this relationship. And it's like, why is she with him? Why is he with her? When they don't even get along. It's like, I'm marrying this woman? We have nothing to talk about. Just all this stuff. Another great episode, though, is The Maestro, which introduces us to Jackie Chiles, of course, a parody of the infamous attorney Johnny Cochran. But he's played by Phil Morris, and he becomes Kramer's attorney when Kramer hires him after he gets burned from the hot coffee. He's like, oh, you didn't make the top, did you? And it's just his manner of speaking. It's outrageous, preposterous. And then when Kramer puts the bomb on. Who told you to put the bomb on? To heal the wounds. And the subplot with George in that episode is funny too, when he sees the store security guard and he thinks how he'd be more comfortable if he had a chair to sit down. And then he's telling Jerry about it, and he's saying, it didn't bother Susan either. That's why I'm different. I can sense the slightest human suffering. Are you sensing anything right now? Love that. And then when he ends up giving the security guard a chair, he's like, not bad at all. And then, of course, the irony when he just is asleep when there is someone shoplifting. Terrible. Misses a robbery because he's sleeping. He's in the chair. He's comfortable. That's a rare moment of George doing something out of kindness, but of course it backfires. But usually, more often than not, it's just George being selfish, George trying to get away with things, George being super insecure and sensitive, George weaving his lies. And in the episode The Cadillac, too, when he just wants to meet Marissa Tomei, because Elaine's friend, she is friends with Marissa Tomei. She's saying, oh, my friend would just love you. She loves short, stocky, bald men. And then he comes up with a lie with Elaine, saying that he helped her because she's having trouble with her boyfriend, Art Vandelay, that he's an importer-exporter, and he wants to focus on the importing and forget about the exporting. And of course, when he meets Marissa, and then she's saying, how is a guy like you, so bald, so funny and quirky, how are you single? And he's like, well, Marissa, I'm sort of engaged. And she punches him in the face. And then he gets punched in the face again when Susan calls him out on his lie. It's like, oh, so what does he import and what does he export? And then, of course, since they didn't match up. And that is a typical moment in the show where if they just had cell phones, it would have been resolved. But this show was a product of its era in the 90s. Just no cell phones, no caller ID. 2-line phone was an up-and-coming thing, call waiting, all that. But another classic phrase from this show, from The Sponge, being sponge-worthy. That's great, too. Then when Elaine has to conserve her sponges because they're off the market now, and then she's talking to that guy saying, run down your case for me again. I eat right, exercise, blood test is immaculate. And that is Scott Patterson, who plays Luke Danes in Gilmore Girls. So that's so funny. It's like, you're going to get rid of those sideburns? Yeah, I'm going to get rid of the sideburns. I also absolutely love the episode The Rye, Elaine's storyline is great with hot and heavy, and then when she gets annoyed that Jerry told the guy that they're really hot and heavy, and then she's saying how, you know what it's like not have any control over a relationship, and then she says, one of these days something terrible is going to happen to you. It has to. No, I'm going to be just fine. Because even in the opposite, how everything was always even Stevens for Jerry, when George is having all the luck, and then Elaine is like, I'm George. She's having all the bad luck, and then Jerry's saying, now George is up here and you're down here. And they go, Elaine, look, a 20. So that too. But in The Rye, I love that whole scene when they're just at dinner, the Rosses and the Costanzas. But first when they're getting ready to leave, and then Estelle is telling him to help her with her dress, and then he's saying, all right, let's not get into panic mode. Anytime he gets hysterical, it's so funny. But then the whole scene when they're having dinner, and Frank is saying, let me understand, you got the hen, the chicken, and the rooster. The rooster goes with the chicken. So who's having sex with the hen? We'll talk about another time. But you see my point here? You only hear of a hen, a rooster, and a chicken. Something's missing, all right. They're all chickens. The rooster has sex with all of them. That's perverse. And then George changing the subject, saying, has anyone seen Firestorm? Oh, that's a hell of a picture. The part with the helicopter, and he's like, hey, I haven't seen it yet. Doesn't have anything to do with the plot. Still I like to go in fresh. And then the whole thing with The Rye, how George is saying, what is this? And Estelle saying, we forgot to bring it in. No, I brought it in. They didn't put it out, so I took it back. It's like, you can't do that because we brought it for them. And then he's saying how he wants to buy another rye and just sneak it into the house and be like, oh, there it is. And so then that scene where Jerry goes to get the rye bread, and then that old woman buys the last one, and he's saying, all right, $50. You can't turn down $50 for a $6 rye. She's like, no way. And then he just finally wrestles it from her arm. She's like, help, shut up, your bag. I love that so much. The fact that he screams that no one helps her. He just steals this rye from this poor old lady. And yet, you still love these characters despite all this petty, terrible stuff that they do. And then when he's just throwing the rye up there, you just see it flying up there. And then finally, George hooks it with the fishing rod, and he grabs it, and then you see the Rosses, and he just says, schnitzes. Gosh. The lengths they go to cover up something, and then it just, of course, doesn't work in the end. I also love the 7, when George is saying, I already have a great name for our kids. It's like, 7. Yeah, it's Mickey Mantle's number. And then Susan getting annoyed, saying, no, I ain't gonna name our baby 7. And then again, he's getting hysterical. All right, let's just stay calm here. Don't get all crazy on me. And he's just screaming out the car window. It's like, calm down, George. You're the one that's getting hysterical. Just so funny. And then Susan's cousin is going to name their baby 7. He's like, but that's my name. I made it up. It's like, what about soda? I thought we all agreed on soda. No, we don't like soda at all. And then Jerry making fun of him. Oh, okay, how about Mug? Mug Costanza. Or Ketchup, pretty name for a girl. Gosh. And then, of course, that season culminating with the invitations. When George buys the really cheap invitations with the toxic glue, and then Susan licking the invitations, and then she just passes out, and then she goes to the hospital, and then the doctor telling him, I'm sorry, she's gone. Gone? Like, she's expired. Are you sure? Completely. And then just, again, capturing the tone of the show absolutely perfectly. Just, she's dead. Dead? I'm so sorry, George. Poor Lily. Because earlier Kramer had been calling her Lily, but she really looks like a lily. And it's just so ironic. George wanting to get out of this relationship, and then she just dies, and then that's it. Just, all right, let's go get some coffee. Just, that's it. They move on. No sadness to it whatsoever. And that's when then Jerry had met that woman that he was suddenly in love with. Like, hey, Sam and this is, how do you like that? And it's like, I can't be with someone who's like me. I hate myself. And then what about, we had a pact. And they just break up. I hate you. So then that was the last episode with Larry David as a showrunner. And then he left the show. So then with the final 2 seasons, Jerry took over as the showrunner. And that's when it got more over the top. It got much more fast-paced. They got rid of the stand-up routines with Jerry. And there are still a lot of really great episodes in those last 2 seasons too. I love the Bizarro Jerry, and that episode just with she had man hands. That man hands thing, that's one of my earliest memories of this show, because by then this was the late 90s. I was really young, but my mom would always watch the show and she still loves it to this day. But that's one of the earliest things I remember of this show, man hands. But that episode's great too, with the Bizarro versions of George, Jerry, and Kramer, with Gene, Kevin, and Feldman, and that they're so polite and considerate, the opposite of our group that we know and love. And then there's also Fargus, hello Fargus, and they're good friends. And just Feldman, instead of bursting in, just Feldman from across the hall, he knocks, takes a second. It's just great. The little kicks is hilarious too, with Elaine's ridiculous dancing with the kicks and the thumbs. And then the scene at the end is just so funny too. The bloopers of that scene, you saying you want a piece of me? You got it! It's just so funny too. The chicken roaster is a funny one too, when Jerry and Kramer switch apartments. Jerry's like, I'm on no sleep. Oh, I'm stressed. And he's just acting like Kramer. It's like, my friend Bob Sacamano. It's like, oh, it was Kramer's friend. Well, we got to talking. And Bob Sacamano is just a character you never see on screen. And there's one point when Jerry asks him, how come I never see him? He wants to know why he never sees you. But then Kramer acting more like Jerry. Like, oh, I like this idea. Just him, basically the straight man, and Jerry acting like Kramer. It's so funny. I love the comeback too. Well, the jerk store called, they're running out of you. And then they're suggesting other lines from, I'm going with jerk store. Jerk store is the line. Jerk store. It's like, this is why I don't like writing with a whole big group. It gets all muddled up. I also love the episode The Susie, with George's ridiculous answering machine message. Believe it or not, George isn't at home. Please leave a message. I must be out, or I'd pick up the phone. Where could I be? Believe it or not, I'm not home. It's just so stupid. I know it's a parody of an old theme song, but it's just so funny. And I just also love that line. My mom and I love this line. For her, not for you. Like when Kramer ends up breaking up with George for her, and then he's saying, George, you're saying you're going to change for her, not for you. It's just hilarious. The abstinence is funny too, when George doesn't have sex, and that makes him smart, and then Elaine not having sex with her boyfriend because he's studying to become a doctor, and then it makes her dumb. And it's also an episode with Jerry's agent Katie, played by Deborah Jo Rupp. She's in a couple episodes, and she's best known as Kitty Foreman from That 70s Show. I also really like the episode The Betrayal. That one's clever because it's told backwards, with them going to the wedding in India, and then George, oh, you're a funny guy, because he's upset with Jerry that he slept with Nina, and then the subplot with Kramer and FDR. Yeah, Franklin Delano Romanowski, he gave me the evil eye. He's saying he wished for him to drop dead, and then he's saying, oh, well, everybody's a little cranky on their birthday. Oh, it's a bad day. You got everyone in your house. You're thinking, these are my friends. Every day is my birthday. And then it goes way, way back to when Jerry was first moving in. He's saying, oh, yeah, Kessler? No, actually, it's Kramer. And that's a little meta joke, because Kramer was first named Kessler, but then Larry was adamant about naming him Kramer. And the strike, of course, is fantastic with Festivus. A Festivus for the rest of us. At the Festivus dinner, you gather your family around and tell them all the ways they've disappointed you over the past year. And then instead of a tree, there's a pole. It requires no decorations. I find tinsel distracting. And then when they're at the Festivus dinner, I got a lot of problems with you people, and now you're going to hear about it. And then the subplot with Jerry dating that woman Gwen, and how she looks bad in certain lighting, and then it's like, Gwen, wait, bad lighting on the porch. Terrible. I like the episode The Strong Box, too, when George is trying to break up with this woman, and then Jerry's saying, so you're in a relationship with the woman you don't like, and you're having an affair with a woman that won't have sex with you. And then George's saying, well, I'm going ice skating with one, and seeing a staged reading of Godspell with the other, which is with who? It doesn't matter. And then when he's talking to one of them, and he's saying, I thought the actor that played Jesus made some odd choices. What? I mean, I had fun ice skating. Terrible. And then Kramer obsessing over hiding the key for the strong box, and then he finally puts it in the bird's food, and the bird dies. And they think the bird ate the key. It's like, Fredo was weak and stupid. He shouldn't have eaten that key. And it turns out the box wasn't locked, of course, the whole time. Also gotta love the serenity now, insanity later. And it's just funny, too, when Jerry taps into his emotions, and then it's like the floodgates open. He's like, what is this salty discharge? And he's crying, he's feeling things. He's like, I love you, Costanza. And George is freaked out by that. And Kramer got his screen door installed. Kramer always just with his ridiculous things he does when he starts Kramerica Industries, or even in that really earlier episode when he's like, you make the dough, like making your own pizza, and then you slide it into the oven, all these things. But this one, when he's got his screen door, and then when he destroys all the computers, George trying to steal computers. Hey, you want to buy a computer? Why not? Okay, good answer. And then when Jerry's saying, oh, Elaine, we should just, like, he's going to propose to Elaine, and then at the end she's saying, Jerry, let's do it, let's get married. So what happened to the new Jerry? He doesn't work here anymore. He's like, I love you, Jerry, back at you, Costanza. And then that great line at the end with George, you know, all these years I've always wanted to see the two of you get back together. Well, that's because you're an idiot. Yep. Also, the yada yada is classic too. You don't think she'd yada yada sex. I've yada yada sex. I went out with this lawyer. I had the lobster bisque. We went back to his place, yada yada yada. I never heard from him again. But yada yada, the best part. No, I mentioned the bisque. And that's also with Jerry being an anti-dentite. I am not an anti-dentite. And that's when Tim Whatley, played by Bryan Cranston, he's in a few episodes. That's great too. And Jerry is offended that he's making all these jokes. And then when he talks to the priest, he's saying, oh, and this offends you as a Jewish person? No, it offends me as a comedian. And then when George just finds me, like, Jerry, I gotta talk to you. I love that moment, too. Like, how did he find him? I also love the dealership's a fun one, with George just wanting Twix, going crazy with that. And then Jerry trying to get a deal on the car when Putty at that point is a salesman. And then when he's talking to Putty and Elaine, he's saying, now what do I have to do to put you two in a relationship today? The Slicer's a great one too, with Jerry thinking the woman he had dated, the dermatologist, that she gave him some kind of rash, but then turns out it was just the rag that Kramer was using to clean off the Slicer. The Frogger is a fun one too. Like, oh, well, my life has been building up to this moment, and then it's a literal Frogger in real life, and then of course it gets run over at the end. And then the finale, obviously, even to this day, there are mixed opinions about it. Personally, I like the finale. It's still in line, obviously, with the show. And what they wanted to do, they had said, was that it's really more of a celebration and thanking the people who had worked on the show, having an opportunity to bring back one-time characters. I can understand, though, why people don't like it. Because, first off, it's not like it's anything new. It's just all these characters coming back, doing their iconic lines again. So it's not like it's new jokes. But the way I see it is that the whole point is, despite this whole trial, that first off, they were going to have this show picked up, Jerry, after all these years. They were going to go out to California. And so then NBC was giving them this plane. They decided to go to Paris, but then they were diverted with Kramer jumping up and down trying to get the water out of his ear. And then there's that great moment too when Elaine's saying, Jerry, I have to tell you something too. It's like, me first, I've always loved. And then she's like, oh, we're straightening out. Just that little last tease, like, oh, like, I've always loved you. But no, then later in the episode he asks her, well, what were you going to say? I've always loved United Airlines or something like that. But then the irony that this whole trial happens with this new law, the Good Samaritan, because they didn't help the guy being mugged. So then they get all the character references to prove how selfish and petty these people are. And then it's so funny, too, how the judge is named Art Vandelay. And then just in the end, when they're just in that jail cell, and then Jerry's saying, look at that button, it's in no man's land. And George says, have we had this conversation before? Have we? I think we have. So it just shows how they're not going to change. still talking about the minutia of everyday life, the smallest things, and that's that. And having said that, I think with this show, they really could have just done a regular episode, not do anything big at all, and just would have worked. That just, life goes on. They're just still exactly who they are, and obviously no sentimentality whatsoever. And it's not like it's necessarily a satisfying thing seeing them go to jail, though. It's not like it's Schadenfreude or happiness at the misfortune of others, where you want to see them get comeuppance, because we're all selfish to our own degree, and we all pick apart people's idiosyncrasies and annoying habits and complain about societal annoyances. So, in that sense, with the characters just still being exactly who they are, that's still in tone with the show. But in the sense that it's just bringing back old characters, showing old clips, that's why I like the first half of the finale better than the second half. But I do think it's a solid finale. And then, of course, we had the reunion, which was already 10 years ago now at this point, too, on Curb Your Enthusiasm. And that was so clever, too, how just within the show of Curb Your Enthusiasm. I love that show, too. It's pretty good. Of course, I had to say that with Larry David. I'm excited for season 10 of that show, but I digress. But it was clever, too, how it was a reunion, but it wasn't a full-blown episode, but they still had storylines. You saw them rehearsing as the characters, which is really clever. And it was with George trying to win back his ex-wife, because in the show, Larry David was trying to win back his ex-wife, Cheryl, on Curb. And then Elaine with her daughter, Isabella. And then it turns out that Jerry's the one who was the sperm donor. So technically they have a daughter together. That's interesting to think about. But that's really clever, too. So I just love this show. It's absolutely timeless to me. It's always funny. And the fact that Larry had such a clear vision for this show from the start, and he and Jerry are just a great writing duo together, and each of these characters, the performances, they are iconic. What's nice too is apparently that before the final taping, the four of them would huddle together, and for the last taping, Jerry had told the three of them that when anyone thinks of one of us, they'll think of all four of us. And I can't think of any other three people I'd rather have that be true of. Something like that, I'm paraphrasing. But that's so sweet, and that's so true, that this group, these four characters, Jerry, George, Elaine, and Kramer, they're iconic and fantastic TV characters and such fantastic writing, and I just love this show so much. So giddy up. And with that, that is going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. You can follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at Storytelling Saga, as well as on Twitter at Storytell Saga. You can also send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by leaving me a message in the contact section of storytellingsaga.com or by sending me an email at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Next week, serene was a word you could put to Brooklyn, New York, especially in the summer of 1912. Somber as a word was better, but it did not apply to Williamsburg, Brooklyn. I'll be discussing A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.